Hello, guys, and welcome to the 9th episode of the Underrated Podcast where we talk to you about sports and we rant about a bunch of stuff that we think should be ranted about. Today, we have a special guest. He headlines on Hockey Night in Canada. He's a senior writer at Sportsnet, and he writes for the NHL Network. Chris Johnston. How are you, Chris?
I'm doing well, guys. Just living the quiet, simple life over here in the COVID-19 pause of life, and obviously the NHL season as well.
Well, we thank you so much for coming on, first of all. It's huge for us. We're just trying to gain a few followers, and to have you on, it's such an honor to, have someone like you on, because we know obviously your work, and we know the stuff that you write on Sportsnet, all the other stuff. Speaking of Sportsnet and your career, so how did you start off your career? Like, what point did you start to realize that this could be a career choice for you?
It's weird even sometimes to think that it is my job, that this is actually what I do for a living. But, going way back when I was young, I always had a dream initially to be a hockey writer. And it was something that was in my head as a pretty young kid. And I ended up going to Ryerson Journalism School in downtown Toronto and sort of got started there. I got a part-time job while I was in university, basically updating the standings for the Ontario Hockey League and writing little 3-paragraph stories. And, over time that built up to me covering the NHL. And, I went to Sportsnet about 7 years ago. And that's probably, for me, turned out to be a big break. I got to start doing television work at that time, in addition to writing. And eventually we did get the national NHL rights and opened the door for me to get on Hockey Night in Canada. So, I can't say that there was one moment where I thought it was going to happen, but certainly it was a long-held dream, and I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and was very lucky that the right doors opened for me.
Yeah, so that's been with you for your entire life. So you being a hockey, fanatic has been with you your entire life. So since you were maybe a child, that you thought that this could be the point where, I know you're obviously wearing a Dallas Cowboys hat too, so you're all around sports, not just NHL, you're all around sports, which is also So did you think that maybe NHL wasn't the way, or maybe NFL was the way to go? Like, did you have those kind of ups and downs where you should pick between NHL or NFL or NBA, that kind of stuff? Or did you know NHL was the way?
Well, I was a hockey fanatic. I was one of those kids that was out on my rollerblades. I was out playing road hockey, whether it was summer or winter, with my buddies. I grew up in a small town, so there wasn't a whole lot else to do. I played organized hockey as well. So I would say that was always my number one priority in terms of professionally. I didn't truthfully know, though, if it could happen. I mean, I didn't have any ins. I didn't have any family connections. No one in my family had done anything like this. So I didn't really know where it was going to end up, and that's why I do feel so lucky that it's worked out. I covered some golf along the way. I also was a pretty avid golfer as a kid, and went to the Masters a few times for work, and the British Open one year, and did some of that. But if I had my choice, it was always to be a hockey writer, and that's where I've ended up now. I don't really cover the other sports. I certainly watched them all. I'm missing them all. This would have been the Masters week as we're talking to you guys right now, so I would have been dialed into that. Baseball season would have just started. I like going to Blue Jays games. I love the NFL. So I'm an all-around sports fan, but for professionally, I always wanted to be the NHL.
And that's awesome as it is. I know that there's some kids out here that dream of being your profession. So if you had any advice to give to somebody, say my age or say Matthew's age, which are 15 and 16 years old, what advice would you give to them going into your profession? Like, what would you say to them that want to do what you do?
Well, I think the biggest difference probably for you guys at your age now versus when I was 15 or 16 is that, for one, I mean, look, we can be in touch this way. I mean, social media wasn't what it was back in those days, so I wouldn't have been able to maybe make the kind of connections you guys can. And so I think you should try to use those. And, I'm very honored you reached out to me, and I'm happy to do this with you today. I think also, though, the one thing to remember is the way you act online, people see that, and people draw an opinion. They draw an opinion of you too, right? Even when they haven't met you, even if they don't realize your age or your background or what you're up to. And so I think be very careful, especially if you want to have a career in this, about how you behave online, whether that's on Twitter or Instagram, starting fights, those types of things. I mean, more people than you know are watching even before you know they're watching, I guess is maybe the best way to put it. So if you treat people with respect, if you do this honestly, I think that you have a chance to do it. And, I don't think any of us know what the world's going to look like on the other side of the coronavirus situation we're in right now. But certainly the media world's going to be impacted by this. But, I'm an optimist. I think there'll be opportunity for people your age that want to get into my industry. I know it doesn't look good today. I realize a lot of media organizations are struggling. But I think that there's a real interest in people telling stories about sports, letting us behind the scenes a little bit, talking about the news and things that go on. And so, I do think that if you're a teenager right now and you want to get into sports journalism in some way, shape, or form, there's going to be a path. But, as I say, the best advice I think I can give is just don't be a jerk online because, people will draw opinions of you.
Yeah,
a lot of celebrities know that route pretty well.
It's true.
Yeah, we've seen so many guys that, have professional career paths and then they've been ruined by maybe one thing they said on Twitter or Instagram. And that's kind of what you're leading towards. So, don't expose yourself to negative reactions on either Twitter or Instagram. So just always be like a positive person is essentially what you're saying.
A little bit. And look, you can debate people. You don't have to agree with everyone and just be a nice guy. But I just think be respectful when you're debating. Don't use slurs. Don't use too many swear words. I think that you have to. There's a way to say, hey, I don't agree with your opinion on this player on this team, but be respectful about it. I think that don't be a hothead. And don't do things you're going to regret. And that's probably good advice for even if you don't want to be a sports reporter, but I do think it's one thing that can prevent you even getting the first door to open before you've even had a chance to prove yourself.
Okay, so now that we heard a lot about you and you seem like a great person, thank you for the advice for anybody that's listening. Moving in kind of to your impression, which is the NHL, and we're kind of going to go into the NHL season. You did write an article on April 2nd, and it's about the 10 questions 10 critical unanswered questions going into the pause, which we both read, and it was great. So thank you for writing that. It was great.
Yeah, I liked it. It was a great article.
Could you explain to anybody that maybe didn't read it, like what you were kind of trying to say with like the actual article? So people that weren't reading it, can you kind of explain what you were trying to say with what you were writing?
Well, basically what it boils down to is none of us have seen this. No one really truly knows where this goes from here. I think that includes Gary Bettman and the top people at the league. And the result of the pause, whether they're able to have a season after this or not, whether they can get the playoffs in this summer, is going to create some complicating factors for the way the NHL runs. And so, really for me, the point of that exercise was to try to zero in on a few issues that are unresolved, things that have to be answered. Whether it's going back and looking at some of the trades made at the trade deadline, if teams gave up an asset for a player, like Vancouver did, say, to get Tyler Toffoli. He played 10 games for them. I mean, what happens to that? Do they get a draft pick back as compensation at some point? Are they just, for lack of a better term, out of luck there because things didn't work out? The salary cap for next year is a huge question. I mean, I think that there's a huge trickle-down effect of this pause on how the NHL will do business. And look, there will be answers to these questions at some point in time. But I think as we're sitting here, on the outside, we're not making the decisions about what happens next. I just thought it was a good exercise to dig down and look at some of the things that we're going to have to figure out as it goes along, including even free agency. I mean, contracts technically run through June 30th right now. I mean, if the league plays in July and August, and you're an unrestricted free agent, say Alex Pietrangelo, the St. Louis Blues defenseman, do you want to play in July and August when technically you don't have a contract for the future? Will you be insured? I think that there's a lot of questions that smarter people than us guys on here are going to be working through. But I wanted to at least spotlight some of those questions right now.
Yeah, so it was obviously great explanation, but say for instance it does go into the summer. Go ahead.
I just kind of have a question about like the whole uncertainty of the future thing. How does this impact the new Seattle expansion, do you think, that's coming into the league in like the next few seasons? How does this impact their financials, do you think?
Well, on one hand, they're probably in a good spot because, it's not even it's more than a year from now before the expansion draft. So, they still have time, I think, to do their preparations for that, which is really the main thing that the hockey side of the operation has to worry about over the next 12 to 14 months. What will be interesting is, though, some of the rules around that. And one of the things that should be kept in mind is the players' teams are supposed to have had 70 NHL games in the last two NHL seasons. So that would either be this season that we're still kind of in the midst of the pause and next year combined. I don't know if the rules will change around that. Will they lower that mark? But, when it comes to next June, we don't know now who the players will be. We'll look back and maybe a guy only has 68 and he can't be exposed depending on if the rules change. I think that, those are some of the questions about Seattle. It's going to impact the pool of players that they get to choose between. The problem is I can't identify in real time who those will be because a lot will depend on what happens in the next year when the season restarts, who those guys get to play. And, in the meantime, Seattle's like everyone else. There's no games to watch. If there were games being played, starting this week with what would have been the start of the playoffs, the Seattle team would have been scouting those games. They don't have much to scout right now, so their scouts are going back through video, which is what teams around the NHL have had their scouts do during this pause.
So, if it did,
for sure,
come back during the summer, do you think that would maybe impact the players that don't have a contract or the players that maybe don't want to play in the summer, that want to go back to maybe their home country to be with their family, like they maybe planned for the rest of the season?
I'm sure on a personal level, some guys don't want to play in the summer. I don't expect them to come out and say that. And certainly, as a whole, the Players Union wants the players to play because there's a chance to make back some of the money lost during this, which benefits everybody. Every single player benefits from the resumption of the season, as do the owners, if it can happen. I think what's interesting is if you're a free agent, though, and, you don't have any future potential, you have no guarantees in terms of a contract, do you want to risk potentially a career-ending injury happening in July that might impact, what you can do in the future? And I don't know because it's hockey and generally hockey players tend to go with the pack, they don't stand out. But there's a chance a free agent says, look, I'm not going to play without a contract. And I don't know who that will be. I think certainly in other sports it would be more likely to happen. But it's at least a question to ponder. If you don't know what your future looks like, would you want to risk the potential of injury, which is obviously there in every hockey game at this level. It's a very dangerous sport. It's fast. It's physical. We're talking about big people. Yeah. Things can happen. And so, I don't know how you get around that. Maybe you let some players negotiate contracts before the playoffs start. Kind of a move we haven't seen before in the NHL, but I know over in Europe when they were pausing the seasons over there, it's something that they allowed to happen in Switzerland. But, it is an important question. And I wouldn't personally blame a player if he was uncomfortable playing without a contract just because, let's face it, these guys make a lot of money, but their careers are pretty short compared to the rest of us, and they have to protect themselves and their families.
Yeah. And
I just have another question. Go ahead.
So say perhaps that maybe the NHL season doesn't go on, maybe it goes for next year. Like maybe is there a team that you think maybe missed out on their chance of the Stanley Cup? Like who was the team that you thought that could have had the best chance at the Stanley Cup?
Well, St. Louis jumps out at me. I think that they were in a great position to take another run at going back-to-back. And, just the mere fact that their captain, Alex Pietrangelo, is an unrestricted free agent, that there's a huge question mark there about whether they'll be able to resign him. I think that this will hurt them. Once this passes, let's assume that the Stanley Cup isn't awarded for the 2019-20 season. I think that they'll view this as a huge missed opportunity. The Boston Bruins are another obvious one just because, a lot of their best players are older. And, Patrice Bergeron, we hope he plays forever, but the history tells us that won't be the case. At some point, he'll have a drop-off. Zdeno Chara, I don't know how many years he has left. They obviously have some really good young players like David Pastrnak, who's having such a fantastic season, but I don't think there's any guarantee that they'll be among the best teams in the league for next year and the year after and the year after, just because of the way that the cycle of things works in the league. And, look, they lost in Game 7 on home ice last season. They were the best team in the regular season when this year was paused. If they don't manage to get a chance for that Stanley Cup, I think that this will be one in particular for those two teams where they'll be wondering what could have been.
Yeah, I just kind of want to jump out another team as well. I would think that the Flyers are probably another good team that had a shot. They had a shot in 2010 and obviously missed it due to a goal that no one saw go in. But I would say that this year they would have had a pretty good run at what I would have thought would have been their time to shine. I think that they were heating up at the right time compared to mid-season, like a lot of the teams have done. Like, for example, Montreal heated up at like the very beginning of the season, and then the injury bug hit them, and that kind of spiraled downhill.
Yeah, and it's important. You know, we've seen a lot of teams like St. Louis last year where if you get hot at the right time, you can ride that sort of wave of momentum to playoff success. And certainly Philadelphia was the hottest team, I would say, in the NHL at the time of the pause. They'd won a whole whack of games in late February and into March, and they felt really good about their positioning and their opportunity this year. I saw Kevin Hayes was interviewed by some reporters, and he acknowledged, look, we don't know when we get back if we'll be able to sort of rekindle that or refine that. And you know, it's part of the interesting part of this sport, I think, is that it is such a team sport. There's dynamics beyond just putting together the best roster on paper that leads to the success you need, especially when it comes through going through the grind of the playoffs. And, you know, Philadelphia was on an excellent trajectory when this whole thing paused. And even if they do finish in July and August, you know, there's no guarantee they get that back. I mean, that's part of what's strange about this. We haven't really seen this before. Obviously, the NHL has missed parts of seasons due to some labor issues in the past, lockouts and those types of things. But, you know, we haven't really seen a season get to 85% completed, which the regular season was when March 12th came around and things were stopped. And if it is restarted 3 months later, it's going to be a new league. I mean, you're going to have players that were looked to be done for most of the season that potentially can play because, you know, right now as we're talking, guys, injured players are still allowed back at team facilities. They're on the ice. They're skating. I mean, those guys, oddly enough, if there's a July restart to the season, might be in a better position than the healthy players were because for the most part, those players aren't able to skate right now. I mean, it will be something like we've never seen if they restarted. I mean, that's partly why I want to see it. You know, it gives us a little bit of hope, I guess, at a time that's kind of a weird period where we're all stuck at home too. But, you know, there'll be teams out of this that no matter how it breaks are going to wonder what could have been. And you're right, Philadelphia, Matt, is a great example of another team, I think, that will, if it doesn't go their way, is going to be like, wow, like why was the timing of that? Why did we figure it out right when everything stopped? And you know, can they put it back together when we do restart?
Thank you, first of all, for that, the analogy. Thank you. That was a lot of information, but I think we've actually reached I think we've heard everything, and I think we've kind of reached the end of it. So we thank you for coming on, first of all. It was a big honor to, have someone like you come onto the podcast. We're a small podcast trying to just gain followers, so it was a big help from you.
Exactly.
And this
no
is
problem.
As you have ever seen our episode, make sure you follow us on Instagram at _underratedpodcast. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, turn on post notifications, like the video, do whatever. Just help us out. And we thank you, Chris, for coming on.
No problem, guys. I wish you well with the Underrated podcast, and I love the Thrashers jersey being part of it. So there's a little bit of history here for anyone watching.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to get more of it. I'm trying to have like one of the largest of the people I know. So I'm hoping to find some.
Good stuff, guys. Thank you.